Onboarding, a process that we all have to go through at some point in our careers, be it the first day you're starting on the job, or be it starting a new venture after a while. And I can safely say that many of us might cringe at hearing that word onboarding. My name is Mikhail Padayachee, and if you're not familiar with the word onboarding, onboarding is the action or process in which a new employee is integrated into an organization. Now, for the purpose of this talk, that definition is a bit broad. This talk more focuses on onboarding within specific delivery streams at an organization. Delivery streams being, say, your accounts department or your marketing department. When a new member joins into each of these teams, the skill sets will be very different. And so onboarding in these spaces will look very different depending on what you need to do. And this holds true for any department within an organization. Now, I'm pretty sure you're still wondering why I'm talking about onboarding. And trust me, I've asked myself this question many a time putting this talk together. I mean, what sane person wants to ramble on about onboarding for an hour, right? But thinking back at it now, it comes from my first experience I had when I started back in 2019. As everyone is, I wanted to put as everyone does, I wanted to put my best foot forward when starting my first job. And I was ambitious and wanted to prove that I belonged in the place that I now found myself in. And so on my first day, on my first project, I was sat down next to one of my seniors and told, he's busy doing the setup at the moment. Once he's figured it out, he'll get you set up. And here's a link to some documentation that you can go through. Now, that was it. And as many of you can expect, that's maybe not enough. But that was my first experience. And as much as I love trawling through confidence documentation as much as the next person, it didn't really give me the leg up that I was looking for to start fulfilling that ambition that I had. And what that ended up doing was creating a lot of anxiety for me. You see, it took me a couple of weeks to get up to speed with what was going on with the project. And in that time, I could see a mountain of work piling up around me, unable to really do anything about it and unable to assist. And I'm sure we've all been there, seeing work getting done around us, wanting to make a contribution, prove that we deserve to be there. And in that, I found myself getting very anxious. It was not a comfortable process. It did eventually end after I finally got set up and got stuck into doing some work, but that feeling stuck with me. And it stuck with me in a way that I didn't realize. Now, as most projects do, they do come to an end, and we were able to successfully close out that project. And once we closed off the project, we moved on to a new one. And what did I find in my calendar? A bunch of meetings scheduled for onboarding. I was like, oh, what's this? And I was a bit hopeful, you see. I thought this might give me that leg up that I wanted to have in the first project that I joined. Way for me to get rolling from the get-go and to put my best foot forward and prove that I belong in the space that I find myself in once again. And as many of the more experienced people will know, a bunch of meetings in your calendar for onboarding aren't always what they seem. And what ended up happening was I was thrown with every acronym in the book, as well as the kitchen sink. And needless to say, I found myself in a very similar situation. I was overwhelmed with information to the point where I thought I was drowning, not knowing which way was up or down anymore, or what made sense. You see, we went into such specific detail that it wasn't really useful in joining the project. And again, it took me a few weeks before I found my feet in this new environment that I had joined. More often than not, the people that have to give onboarding talks within teams don't really have much direction about it either. They often follow the example of what their onboarding looked like when they last received it, who knows how many years ago that was, and no one really teaches them how to go about doing that. I mean, what could go wrong with that, right? And I started wondering to myself, was this really just something that I experienced myself? And so when putting this talk together, I went and did some research, and I found some very interesting articles. The first article that I found referenced that 52% of new hires feel undertrained. But coupled with this, I found another article that referenced that 64% of people that leave within the first year of starting at a new job reference negative onboarding experiences as one of the reasons. I also found that 74% of people found onboarding quite boring. I think we can all agree it can be quite boring. But 66% of the people likely to leave also found that onboarding was confusing. And on top of that, 64% thought it was an outright failure. So I realized that it wasn't just me that found this process this way. It wasn't just my team that was struggling with this, or my organization. But does it always have to be this way? See, I think onboarding can be a tool that not only strengthens teams, but also can be a positive experience for everyone that goes through it. I didn't expect to make onboarding my mountain when I started off in my career. I mean, I'm a developer after all, and I'm pretty sure many of you picture developers sitting in a corner quietly, avoiding everyone that comes near them. But onboarding, which is quite a people process, was not something I expected to become my niche. And looking back at it now, that first experience really did impact how I viewed this process. So I found myself in a leadership position in my team. And needing to onboard members into our space, I realized that I focused a lot on the people that I was onboarding rather than the space that we were in. And so I started focusing a lot on the onboarding experience and how I can make it better. And to date, I've given onboarding to around 20 to 25 people since giving my first onboarding talk 4 years ago. Now, not necessarily the most impressive statistic, 20 to 25 people doesn't sound like a lot, but in a process that's only done maybe once a year for 1 or 2 members, can be quite daunting. I spent a lot of time tailoring this process to apply to not only technical people in our space, but business people as well as non-technical people as well, applying to all levels of experience within our organization. But back in 2023, I faced probably one of the toughest challenges I've ever had in my career. In 2023, my team was busy with the migration of a 12-year-old legacy system. As anyone would know, in migrating a legacy system, not everything goes to plan, and they can be quite challenging. And my team of 3 soon found ourselves in a position that many would have expected. We were running behind schedule, and things were not going smoothly. And so we had to make a choice. Either we needed to bring in more people into the project, or we needed more time. As everyone knows, when you bring on new members into a team, it can detract from the productivity of the team. Granted, larger teams may feel the impact a bit less, but in our small team of 3, having one team member with reduced capacity would have been detrimental in the space. And unfortunately, we couldn't buy ourselves more time. We had to be done by the end of the year. And so I had to go about onboarding our new members. At the time of onboarding these new members, I was informed of 2 new members that would be joining at the end of the week and 2 more that would be joining at the end of the month. 4 new members doesn't sound too bad, right? But an interesting statistic, if you had to ask any HR representative how long it would take to onboard a new member, the most common answer that you'll get is it takes 3 to 6 months to onboard a new member effectively. And that was time we really didn't have. Now, I didn't know how many people I would eventually be onboarding. And so we had to look at this process. And I cannot stress that I did not have time to dedicate to this process as I had done before. Being one of the seniors in the space, a lot of my time had been spent addressing a lot of the issues that we were having with the migration. And I couldn't offload this task onto the other members either. Eventually, I did onboard 10 to 12 members into the space of varying different skill levels and different occupations. And this happened over a period of about 2 months. And looking back at it now, spoiler alert, we were able to successfully deliver the project. I'm still left with the question of how. I didn't know how we were able to do it because realistically, looking back at what we were facing, I identified 4 main focus areas that when we addressed these in our onboarding process, it gave us a massive boost in the time it took to onboard members and actually made the process a lot more effective. The first of these focus areas is context. Context or understanding, you can choose what you want to call it, but context was one of the first things that I identified that helped us during this process. When we were onboarded into the project initially, all the developers that went through the big information session agreed that maybe that was not the most ideal way to onboard members into the space. And so we put our heads together when we had to onboard our first member, and we came up with our bright idea, or this revolutionary idea, you see. It was something that none of us could keep quiet about. We were all very excited, and we thought this was the way forward. Trust me, you're never going to guess what it is. it was another information session. Now, you're probably sitting there a bit confused. It's like, how is that any different to what you went through when you joined the project? Well, you see, our information session was a bit different. Our information session was aimed at giving our new joiners a high-level overview of the space rather than going into the low-level detail. It was aimed at familiarizing them with anything that they might find in the space when working within the project, but not going into too much detail to confuse them in the initial session. And so we went about doing that, and after the session, we thought we'd done a good job. The session was everything that we wanted it to be, and our new members seemed to have enjoyed it overall as an experience. That was until a few days later, noticed him sitting at his desk, looking a little bit confused at what he was facing, and realized maybe there was a gap that we needed to fill. Now, a high-level overview is brilliant. It can be a very useful tool in orientating yourself into smaller projects. But in the current project that we found in the migration, the space was exponentially larger. Having given the same high-level overview onboarding session previously in previous sessions, that session took over an hour and a half to finish. A high-level overview taking an hour and a half, I think we can all agree, is a little bit much. And that was not ideal. And so when onboarding these new members into the team, I had to address this problem. And so in doing this, realized that I needed to be more specific as to what our members needed to know. Rather than orientating them with everything in the space and still confusing them at the end of the day, I decided that we needed to give our members as much specific context as possible as to what they're doing when they join. And the goal with this is to be as specific as possible. When new members join your team, and when I joined my first project, I didn't know what the immediate need for my skills were. And so, by being as specific as possible as to where someone needs to fit in when they join a project or join a space, it helps give them a focus of where they need to start applying their knowledge and where they need to start filling in gaps in their understanding. In our space, we had 3 individual teams all working within the same application. And by having our new members join the space, they were able to orientate themselves not only with what the teams were focusing on, but also the members in those teams and who was currently doing what. And so it allowed them to quickly gain a lot of context as to what was currently going on in the space, which then allowed them to see where they need to fit in a lot sooner. The next focus area that we found was direction. And no, I'm not talking about directions to the bathroom, although that would be very useful, trust me. Direction in this sense would be set parts to complete work and resolve problems. Earlier in 2023, I had to onboard a graduate into my team. And during this onboarding process, we faced probably one of the most common problems in all onboarding: access issues. We've all been there. You're not able to access a system or a resource that you need, and so you end up sitting there idly waiting for this thing to magically materialize. And being faced with onboarding a graduate, someone that was in the position that I found myself when I first started my career, I really didn't want them to go through what I went through, sitting around idly, trying to be productive in a new space they found themselves in. And so I looked for ways around this. The solve I found for these access issues, though, was something we call pair programming. Now, if you're not a developer and you haven't been through pair programming is where 2 developers pair up, as the name would suggest, and you tackle the same task together. Being remote, thank you, COVID, we were able to sit on a call for most of the day addressing items that I was busy working with in the space. And what ended up happening was, in these sessions, I started setting an example of how our graduate could go around solving problems within the space, familiarizing them with the application and its inner working and how to troubleshoot problems without them actually needing to go through it themselves. Sort of setting an example or a template of how to actually complete work in the space. One of the other things that ended up happening during this time of peer programming or pair programming was when I was faced with a problem or a challenge in the space, I would often call other members in the team, be it analysts for clarification or another developer for assistance on the matter. And I ended up pulling my grad into all of these meetings with me. We all know that awkward feeling of going up to someone and be like, hey, can you help? We all question ourselves when we're new and we've just started our careers, whether or not that's acceptable. These people expect me to do my job on my own, and you want to prove that to yourself. And sometimes it takes a while to realize that that's actually okay in a space. And by pulling my grad into all of these meetings with me, they quickly got an understanding of how to go about resolving problems they might face outside of their immediate work deliverables. When the access issues were resolved and they were able to work autonomously, they knew how to go about solving problems that they were facing. And at the end of the day, because they'd been sitting with me for my problems, they knew they could always come back to me for theirs. The third focus area that we addressed were reviews. In most development spaces, a common practice is peer reviews, merge requests, or pull requests. It's known by many names, but is the practice of reviewing code before it gets saved or committed into a repository. And our team, we had very strict reviews. Before code would get merged, we would have multiple people looking at the reviews, providing feedback to our members on our team. The main goal in these reviews, though, from our team is to be as objectively critical in the feedback that you give. No one likes being told they're doing a bad job, especially when you're new and you're starting out somewhere. But being objective in the feedback that you give not only allows someone to grow faster and understand where they might be going wrong in the space, but it also sets an expectation. More often than not, when you join somewhere for the first time, you do not fully understand what is expected of you. No one really tells you, and you kind of figure that out on your own. But by having an objectively critical review process, new members in our team were able to quickly understand where they needed to fit and how they were supposed to do that. And for our graduates, this review process formed a bit of a safety net and allowed them to explore the space safely. Additionally, the way we do our reviews in our teams may be a bit different to most spaces. In our reviews, we make sure that at least 2 members are reviewing the work. And this way, rather than creating a debate between 2 people on work, you create a conversation with multiple people. And fostering this, or having this space for communication, bolsters your team even further and allows members to communicate effectively, not only on problems, but on ways forward as well. The last of these focus areas that we identified was reinforcement. Reinforcement being solidifying knowledge that had been built up in the space thus far. By the time I hit my 5th and 6th member that I was onboarding, I realized that I didn't have a lot of time on my hands to dedicate to onboarding these new members. I was being spread way too thin. As we all know, when you join the organization, there's a whole bunch of context that you're missing. Business knowledge, or maybe even just spatial knowledge into the application that you're working on. And so, previously, I'd spent a lot of one-on-one time with our members, filling in any gaps of knowledge that they may have had. This process, although lengthy and very time-consuming, was very vital in the space that we found ourselves in. And having this sort of buddy system in which members knew that they could come to me for help allowed them to tackle work items on their own. Now, our space ended up having a lot of junior members. And when I mean juniors, I'm not talking about necessarily people that are just starting out their careers. I'm talking about people that have only been in the space for maybe 6 months to a year. And so what we found were these members had imperfect foundations in the space. Due to the sheer size, it was impossible to know everything in a day. And so there were a lot of gaps in knowledge and understanding of business contextual things that our members needed to know. So by the time I onboarded my 5th and 6th member, I was looking for ways to offload this process onto other members into our team. And I decided that the best people for this job would be these juniors, people that had only been in the space for 6 months to a year. And the reason for that was I firmly believe that there is no better person to give you a quick start in a space than someone that's just figured it out for themselves. Someone that's gone through the pains and been through all the little niggles that everyone might go through during an onboarding process. And so, leveraging this, I had our newer members onboard all of our new members. And in this process, allowed them to be mentors for our onboardees. What I found in doing this was a lot of the members did in fact have imperfect understanding of the system. But when they were faced with a challenge that they didn't know how to go about solving, they would then come to me. And that allowed me to go and fill in any of the gaps of understanding that they may have had around the system. And this meant that the time that I spent assisting these members on active work in the space was a lot more productive. Now, I'm pretty sure you're wondering, or you might be sitting there thinking, okay, that's all well and good. These focus areas might be nice to know and all of that. But how does that apply to me? If you're not a developer, it might not be as relatable. So let's use a different example here. Okay. Imagine you're hired to paint a house, but not just a simple house with 4 walls. You're hired to paint a mansion. Okay. And you rock up on your first day with your paint and your paintbrush, and they say, okay, cool, go and paint the bedroom. And that's it. That's all you're told. You have to go paint a bedroom. Where do you start? You don't know. And so you spend all your time wandering through the halls trying to find this bedroom in this massive 3-story mansion that you now find yourself in. And just wondering, where on earth is this magical wall that you need to now go and paint? If we look at our focus areas now in this example, if someone were to tell you, go and paint the 3rd bedroom on the right of the staircase on the 3rd floor, that gives you enough context to start looking at where you need to start filling in. And so you're able to dedicate time earlier into understanding what you need to do immediately. Now, if you've never painted a wall before, as maybe a lot of us haven't had the need to, you might not know how to go about painting a wall. And having someone in the space that is familiar with painting walls, showing you how to go about doing it, might give you a better understanding of how that task needs to be fulfilled. I, for one, know that painting my first wall, I wasn't necessarily aware of putting down a drop sheet. Alternatively, while someone is showing you how to paint the wall, they might make a mistake and they might go and fix it. And so now you have a better understanding of how to go and fix the mistake that you might also make, a very common mistake, like dropping paint on the floor. So now you have an understanding of how to tackle problems on your own and how to understand that, and you have direction in one way to go when you start your own task. In terms of reviewing your work, say you've painted one room and you now tasked with painting the rest of the mansion, but you've never painted a wall before. You don't know if the way you painted the room is sufficient. Having a very strict review process might point out things in how you're painting the wall that you need to improve before you go and paint the mansion, and it might save you a lot of time in the long run. You might have uneven brush strokes, or you might have splashed the paint onto the roof, rolling the wall too fast. Trust me, I've done that before, and that can be a nightmare. But having someone review your work early enough, as well as giving you constructive criticism or objective feedback in those reviews, can help you understand better how you're supposed to go about doing your tasks, as well as giving you an expectation of the standard in which you need to perform. And lastly, reinforcement. If someone now joins to help you paint the rest of the house, and you give them a new room to paint, they might have a window in their room where you never had to paint around a window. And so you have to go about figuring out how to paint around this window with them. And in teaching them how to go paint this room and now facing this problem with them, it not only solidifies your understanding of painting the house better, but also now bolsters your existing knowledge. And as the person giving you the task to onboard the new member, means I have to spend less time teaching others on how to paint the wall. I mean, no one wants to be teaching others forever, right? Now, I know none of these focus areas that I've told you today are revolutionary, but it's often the small things that we miss or we undervalue the most. And very small tweaks to these focus areas, we were able to see massive improvements in our onboarding experience. I know onboarding can be boring. Trust me, I've dreaded giving this talk plenty of times myself. But I understand its value. I know how beneficial it can be not only for me and my team, but for the members that are joining the project as well. One of the things I often do with our onboardees is ask them for feedback. The day that they've gone through the session, a few weeks, and even a few months after, ask for feedback and collect feedback from those that have gone through your process. You might find that areas that you thought that you were doing well in were actually more confusing than they needed to be. And you might find aspects of your onboarding process that work really well that you can maybe emphasize and use to strengthen the overall process. At the end of the day, onboarding is a people process, and no two people are the same. A senior joining your space might find having a clearer direction or understanding of where they need to fit in immediately less relevant and might really appreciate a high level overview. Whereas a junior in the space, myself included, would really have appreciated direction and assistance in understanding how to go about completing tasks. And will you get this right 100% of the time? Probably not. But I challenge you to try. I challenge you to try and take a process that is infamous for being a long, boring, and maybe not even a well thought out process, and turn it into something that you can use to bolster your teams in the future. Thank you.